Benny wasn't the first dog Clara had ever owned, but he was the one who made her the quietest. For the past 10 years, Clara's small wooden cabin on the edge of the pine forest had been a final stop for many abandoned animals, creatures once marked by violence, neglect, illness, or loneliness. She didn't choose the strong or the beautiful. She chose the broken ones, perhaps because she had once been one of them. Clara met Benny on a windy April afternoon at the local animal rescue shelter. A staff member pointed to a metal cage in the corner of the yard, where a yellow-gray Labrador was sitting with his face to the wall. "This one was locked up for years in an illegal breeding facility," they said. "We're not sure he can recover. He doesn't eat, doesn't respond, doesn't show any joy." Clara looked into the cage. Benny didn't turn around. Only his tail lay silently along the cold cement floor. His ears drooped slightly, as if he'd long since given up hope. Without a second thought, Clara signed the adoption papers that very day. When they arrived home, Benny did nothing a typical Labrador would do. He didn't run around exploring, didn't sniff everything, didn't wag his tail to greet his new owner. Benny simply walked slowly to a corner of the living room, turned his face to the wall, and lay down. No whining, no whimpering, no interaction. Clara spent the entire afternoon laying out rugs, preparing toys, rubber balls, plush bears, ropes, chew toys. She made warm water, boiled chicken, played classical music. She sat near Benny, reading poetry, whispering, singing softly. But he didn't move. His eyes didn't look at anyone, always staring into some invisible void, as if his soul was still trapped somewhere in that old cage, where there was no light and no one called his name. Clara knew she couldn't rush it. Some wounds couldn't be healed with good food or sweet words. Some souls just needed a corner to curl into, to be silent and breathe. A few days later, while cleaning out an old storage nook by the porch, Clara stumbled upon a plastic bin full of old toys left by the dogs that had passed. Among them was a brown stuffed rabbit, its ears wrinkled and one leg coming undone. Clara wiped off the dust and placed it beside the other toys in Benny's corner. That night, as Clara turned off the lights to go to bed, she paused. Benny was no longer facing the wall. He was sitting still, his front paws wrapped around the stuffed rabbit, his head resting against its frayed ear. He didn't chew it, didn't shake it, didn't play. He just held it, as if it were the only thing in the world that could keep him from freezing. From that day on, the stuffed rabbit became part of Benny. He carried it everywhere, with him while eating, walking around the garden, lying in the sun on the porch. Once, Clara accidentally put it in the washer along with the blankets, and Benny ran around the house, whining like a lost child. When Clara returned it, now clean and fresh-smelling, he just quietly lay down, circled his legs around it, and held it again. Not angry, not happy, just needing it. Clara watched and slowly understood. Benny didn't need toys. Benny needed a companion, something safe, unchanging, something that wouldn't yell at him, wouldn't force him to breed, wouldn't starve him in the dark. Something that would never hurt him. And in this fragile world, somehow, that stuffed rabbit was the only thing he could trust. Weeks turned into months. Benny didn't show much progress. He still didn't play, didn't interact, didn't respond when Clara called his name. But he no longer withdrew. He was present, silent but not hiding, like an old soul rising from the depths of a lake, sitting quietly on the damp shore, watching the world without daring to enter it. Clara sometimes wondered, maybe Benny would never return to being a normal dog. But she didn't need him to be. She just needed him to know that here he was allowed to exist, allowed to be silent, allowed to keep his fear, as long as he didn't have to fear alone. One early autumn afternoon, when the wind began to chill and pine leaves rustled, Clara sat on the wooden porch, watching Benny sleep, the stuffed rabbit tucked close to his chest, his breathing steady. And she thought, maybe this is enough. But then, life, as always, had quiet turns no one could foresee. A night storm rolled in, cold and windy, waking Clara with a faint sound. Distant, like the wind moaning, but it wasn't. She threw on her coat, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped onto the porch. In the soaked darkness, right at the edge of the steps, was a tiny creature, trembling violently. Its fur was matted to its body, golden eyes wide with fear. A kitten, she thought, a kitten about to freeze to death. Clara didn't hesitate. She scooped it up, feeling the fragile skeleton shivering in her arms. She used a towel to dry it, placed it in a box lined with blankets, turned on a heat lamp. "It's okay now, little one," she whispered. "You're safe." She didn't know that the creature in her lap wasn't a house cat. She didn't know that fate had just delivered a test, not for her, but for Benny. And that the stuffed rabbit would no longer be the only thing Benny needed to hold. Clara placed the tiny creature in an old wooden box, lined with soft cloth, under the golden glow of a heat lamp near the fireplace. The rain still pounded on the metal roof, and the wind hissed through the cracks like anxious whispers. That creature, the kitten, lay curled up, unmoving, not meowing, like a tattered ball of fur abandoned in a storm. Clara sat beside the box, gently wiping its wet fur with a dry towel. The kitten's eyes remained open, honey-colored but unresponsive. She murmured soft words, the same way she had comforted so many weary souls she'd saved before. "It's okay, little one. This place is safe now. We're not in a rush. We'll wait until you can trust." Benny stood at the kitchen doorway, not stepping inside. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just watched, his sad brown eyes fixed on the small creature, unmoving. Clara didn't notice. She was too busy pouring warm milk into a bowl, searching for clean towels, inspecting the scratches on the kitten's front leg. Faint marks, probably from branches or sharp stones. But with the instincts of someone who'd lived with animals all her life, she felt something wasn't right. That little head, those ears, sharper than usual, the short tail, bigger paws, and most notably, the faint spots along its back, like smoke streaks over cinnamon-colored fur. Clara had never raised a wildcat before, but deep down, she knew this wasn't a domestic kitten. But that didn't matter. Not that night, not in this storm, not when the tiny creature was clinging to life. Benny still didn't move from the threshold. He sat there like a statue. The only thing alive were his eyes, as if staring through the rain into a memory no one else could reach. Ash, the name Clara would later give the kitten, refused to stay still. Though her body was too weak to stand, her wild instinct burned in every motion. Ash kept crawling out from the blanket, searching for dark corners. Beneath the table, behind the chair legs, inside cabinet gaps. Wherever there was shadow, there was Ash. Her golden eyes wide in panic, always watching everything like a creature about to be devoured. Clara was helpless. She couldn't keep Ash still, couldn't soothe her. She knew the deepest wounds don't bleed. And then, on a morning after the rain had stopped and the first rays of sunlight slipped through the curtains, the first strange thing happened. Clara was making coffee when Benny walked into the kitchen, the stuffed rabbit held gently in his mouth. He walked slowly, each step deliberate, not the usual aimless shuffle. Then he paused in the middle of the kitchen, tilting his head slightly. Beneath the staircase, two golden eyes stared back. Ash, the tiny wildcat, hiding in the shadows, head peeking out from the edge of the blanket. She didn't meow, didn't growl, just looked. Benny looked back, without moving. That gaze stretched out like a silent song. No hostility, no curiosity, just presence. Calm, quiet, but suffocatingly deep. Then Benny slowly placed the stuffed rabbit down in the middle of the kitchen, turned away, and walked off without looking back. Clara held her breath. Ash stepped out, not with the bold stride of a predator, but with hesitant, awkward steps, as if the floor were thin ice. She gently touched her nose to the stuffed rabbit, sniffed, then withdrew, back into the shadows. Benny simply lay down in the corner of the room, not holding the rabbit for the first time since the day he was adopted. Clara turned away to wipe her eyes. That night, Benny didn't sleep with the rabbit. He left it lying in the middle of the kitchen, like an unspoken offering. The next day, he brought another toy, an old fabric ball that once belonged to Buddy, a dog who had passed away many years ago. He placed it beside the rabbit, then returned to his corner. Ash emerged again, slow, cautious, but unmistakably present. She touched the ball, gently scratched it, didn't bite, then hid again. Clara gradually understood what Benny was saying, speaking in a way only broken souls could understand. That, you don't have to trust me yet. That, but I will place what matters most in front of you. That, if you need them, they're there. Day by day, it continued like that. Each morning, Benny left a new item, a rope, a plush bear, a rubber ball, near Ash's hiding spot. And each morning, Ash stepped out, stayed a bit longer, moved more confidently. Her tail no longer bristled, her steps no longer trembled. One afternoon, Clara saw a scene that took her breath away. Ash didn't just touch the toy. She used her paw to nudge the fabric mouse, then backed away. Her first game ever, played in silence, in the golden light streaming through the curtain, between an old dog and a wild kitten, neither teaching the other, just learning together how not to be afraid. That night, Clara sat in the quiet house, watching the two creatures lying apart, with a line of toys between them, like a thread of fragile trust. And she realized, in that moment, no one was alone anymore. Benny was no longer the silent old dog clutching a rabbit. Ash was no longer the wild creature trembling in darkness. Both of them, somehow, had found each other through the most wounded parts of themselves. October passed like a quiet melody. Every day felt the same, and yet somehow entirely different. Each morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen window onto the wooden floor, forming a long, thin, golden thread. In the stillness of the cabin, the old dog woke at the same hour, stretched slowly, then carefully walked through the rooms. He wasn't searching for anything. He was simply walking like a nameless guardian. After inspecting every corner, Benny returned to the spot beneath the stairs, where Ash usually hid. He didn't get too close. He lay a short distance away, just far enough not to make Ash feel watched, but close enough for her to know she wasn't alone. Ash no longer hid deep in the shadows. Her small head, sharp ears, and golden eyes had grown braver. Sometimes she stretched out, eyes no longer tense like in the early days. But she still made no sound. No meows, no growls, just presence, tinged with hesitation. Clara watched from afar, her heart warm and worried all at once. She didn't know whether this bond between Benny and Ash would last. One was an old dog who had lived in darkness and only just learned how to exist. The other, a wild bobcat, born to trust no one. But something in the way they looked at each other kept Clara from interfering. They were like two drifting specks of dust colliding by chance, equally fragile, equally battered, and somehow finding each other in a moment no one else could understand. One morning, Clara woke later than usual, having had a restless night. As she came downstairs, she froze. The space beneath the stairs was no longer a hiding place. Ash was lying next to Benny, not pressed close, but no longer separated by fear. Between the two was an old pillow, scattered toys, a rubber ball, a fabric mouse, a small plush bear. Most notable of all was the brown stuffed rabbit, the the one Benny had once never let go of, now lying between them. Ash reached out a paw and nudged the rabbit's ear, then turned to Benny. No sound, no need. Benny simply lifted his head, gently licked Ash's nose, then rested his chin on his front paws. Clara turned away, gripping the edge of a chair, lips trembling. She had witnessed many encounters between wild and domestic animals before. Most involved fences, wariness, or resistance. But here, between an old caged dog and a wild bobcat once afraid of light, there was something beyond instinct. There was trust. There was gentleness. There was something neither of them had ever been given the chance to receive. From that day on, the house began to change. Benny no longer treated the rabbit as a treasure. He left it near Ash, or placed it in the shared play area. Every day, he found another toy, tucked away in the shed or some forgotten corner, and placed it beside Ash as if to say, "I trust you." Ash no longer hid. She began to roam the house, cautiously but without fear. She no longer avoided Clara, just kept a respectful distance. Whenever Clara sat reading or cooking, Ash would lie a few steps away, eyes never leaving her. One day, Clara placed a feather tied to a string on the floor. Ash stared at it for a long time, then stretched out her paw and gave it a gentle push, her eyes flashing with a strange light. For the first time, she played. Clara couldn't speak. Only Benny, lying on the nearby rug, gently wagged his tail. Slowly, steadily, like a silent round of applause. Gradually, they formed a habit no one had taught. Every morning, Benny went on a patrol around the house as if he were a guard making sure everything was safe. Once finished, he would lie by the doorframe looking inside, where Ash sat waiting. Ash, like a small student, took one more step out of the shadows each day. He began climbing onto the windowsill to watch birds, chasing fallen leaves in the yard, then curling up beside Benny's legs in the afternoon. No one commanded it. No one taught it. Just two beings, one old, one young, one wounded by the past, one newly discovering the world, figuring out how to coexist. Clara called it the silent language. A language only broken souls could hear and understand each other through. And then, one late autumn afternoon, Clara was making tea when she heard hurried footsteps. She turned. Benny was running, eyes full of urgency. He didn't bark, just looked at her, then ran toward the stairs, turned to look back, beckoning. Clara followed. Ash was stuck on top of the bookshelf, slipped while climbing, now trembling, claws gripping tight. Benny stood below, rising up on his hind legs, whining softly. Clara didn't need more words. She climbed onto a chair, reached up to hold Ash, bringing him down. Ash didn't scratch, didn't growl. He just buried his face in her neck, his heartbeat pounding. Benny came close, licked Ash's ear, and Ash didn't pull away. It was the first time Clara saw Ash allow someone to touch him without retreating. And it was then she realized they were no longer two separate creatures. They had become something new, a shared life, a quiet companionship. A dog who once clutched a stuffed rabbit out of fear of the world. A wildcat who once fled from light because he didn't know who to trust. Now they shared the same corner, the same streak of sunlight, the same gentle breath. No leash required, no sound needed. Only presence, full and deep. The November wind carried a dryness and unease. The forest near town was starting to feel brittle, as if every blade of grass, every tree branch only needed a single cigarette ember to burst into disaster. But life in Clara's wooden cabin still flowed in a slow rhythm. Benny, still the silent guardian, patrolling the house each morning, sunbathing beside Ash each afternoon. Ash, now older, bolder, often perched on the windowsill, watching birds and chasing sunlight. Clara, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea in hand and a rare sense of peace she had scarcely known in her life. Until one night. A night Clara would never forget. A night when the sky wasn't black, but orange-red like diluted blood, spreading across the heavens like a burning canvas. The fire alarm blared at 2 a.m., sharp, piercing, and slicing through the heart like a blade tearing fabric. Clara jumped up. In a moment, she couldn't believe her eyes as she looked out the window. The hill in the distance, where the pine forest began, was on fire. The flames looked like a furious dragon crawling down the slope, devouring the dark. She moved by reflex. Emergency bag, water, documents, medicine, they were already prepared, just needed to be thrown into the trunk. But when she called out for Benny and Ash, there was no answer. Clara ran through the house, opened every room, called again. Benny, Ash, no sound. Only the wind howling through the windows. The scent of smoke began creeping in through cracks in the walls, slipping in like a silent, cold spirit. She checked the downstairs. No one. Upstairs, no one. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. The emergency drills had said, when the third alarm sounds, you leave. No waiting, no searching. But how could she? She couldn't leave them behind. Then, in the last bedroom down the hall, rarely used, she saw two golden eyes glowing in the dark. Ash. He was curled under the bed, eyes wide open, body trembling like a leaf in the wind. Clara knelt down and called, but Ash didn't move. He was frozen in fear, and beside Ash was Benny. He wasn't holding the stuffed rabbit. He wasn't hiding. He hadn't run. Benny was standing, back straight, eyes on Clara, then lowering his head to gently grasp the scruff of Ash's neck. That gesture, strong and tender, made Clara hold her breath. Ash, completely trusting, stayed still. No resistance, no growl, no struggle. Benny walked out from under the bed, carrying Ash as if he were a part of himself. Not rushed, not panicked. Step by step through the thickening smoke. Clara burst into tears, not out of fear, but because she was witnessing a miracle. A dog who once couldn't meet anyone's gaze, now leading someone else to safety. A creature who had clung to a stuffed rabbit just to survive, now carrying a fragile soul on his shoulders, walking through fire. They exited the house as one. Ash lay on Benny's back, eyes closed, front paws wrapped loosely around his neck. Benny didn't look back. He just walked, steady, purposeful, toward the car, as if he had done this 100 times. Clara opened the back door, her heart clenched. Benny placed Ash on the seat, then jumped up beside him, using his body to shield Ash from the blinding light and the screaming sirens outside. For the first time since coming home, Benny didn't look for the stuffed rabbit, because now he was holding something far more important, a real life, a friend. Clara drove through her tears. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, not just from fear, but from emotion. In the rear-view mirror, she saw Benny and Ash curled up together, one golden, one brown, one of the forest, one of the home, like two musical notes sounding in harmony amid the chaotic symphony of fire truck sirens and rescue helicopters. The evacuation center was packed. Harsh, white neon lights, voices, crying children, radio chatter, walkie-talkie bursts. Ash trembled with fear, but Benny kept him close, as if ready to hold back the entire world. Benny didn't take his eyes off Ash all night. Every time someone passed by, every time a loud noise rang out, he positioned himself in front, shielding, his eyes turning to Clara, as if asking, "Are we okay? Is everything all right?" Clara could only nod, swallowing her tears. She had never seen anyone, human or animal, change so quickly. But perhaps It wasn't change. Perhaps it was something that had always been deep within Benny, a protective instinct, just waiting for a reason big enough to awaken. And Ash, the wild bobcat who had once feared even the sound of the wind, had now found peace in the heartbeat of an old dog. That entire night, Clara did not sleep. She sat on a folding chair, watching the two small beings sleeping soundly beside each other. Between them, there were no leashes, no training commands. Only trust, primal, absolute, the kind Clara once thought could never exist between a wild creature and one that had lost all faith. The next morning, good news arrived. Firefighters had contained the blaze just before it reached the town's edge. Clara's wooden house and the small garden where they once played was still intact. They returned after 3 days, but everything had changed forever. As the pickup truck rolled along the familiar dirt road leading to the wooden cabin, Clara said nothing. She only gripped the steering wheel lightly, eyes fixed ahead, though her heart pounded like a winter drum in her chest. Benny sat in the back seat. Ash was curled against him, not asleep, but no longer tense like on evacuation day. The two were silent, as if understanding that what awaited ahead was not simply a house, but something more sacred, a beginning. The wooden gate creaked open, the sound so familiar it brought Clara to tears. The house was still standing. The pine tree in the yard had lost some needles. The porch steps were scattered with stray ashes, but nothing had burned. The glass wind chime still sang gently in the breeze. In the soft glow of early sunlight, the house looked like a miracle left behind after a great flood. Benny was the first to step out of the car. He didn't rush in like other dogs. He walked deliberately toward the door, then turned, as if checking whether Ash was keeping up. Ash looked at him, then leapt down, feet light as feathers, eyes still hesitant. He didn't run, didn't hide, just walked beside Benny, together, back to what had once been a shelter, now turned into part of their very being. Clara opened the door, stepped inside, and paused. The house had been empty for 3 days, but it wasn't cold. On the contrary, it felt like it was breathing, as if it still held the warmth of the 3 souls who lived there. Clara stepped into the kitchen first, then the living room. Everything was in place. Benny's old blanket on the sofa, Ash's pillow under the stairs, and an object lying still on the small wooden shelf near the fireplace. The stuffed rabbit. Clara had left it behind during the evacuation, not thinking Benny would survive, let alone need it again. But when Benny saw the rabbit, he didn't run to grab it. He just looked, long and quietly, then turned to Ash. Clara held her breath. Benny walked over, gently picked up the rabbit, not clutching it to his chest like a treasure, but brought it to the shared play area, right next to Ash. Ash lowered his head, sniffed it gently, then placed a paw on the rabbit's ear. They both lay down together. Clara turned away, tears falling freely. Not from sentimentality, but because what she had just witnessed were no longer 2 lost souls. They had become a family. The days that followed returned to routine, but not the same. Benny no longer needed to patrol the house every morning alone. He still did, but now with Ash, sometimes leading, sometimes following. They had a rhythm now, one that didn't need Clara's voice or a leash to guide. Ash no longer stayed only under the stairs. He was everywhere, at the kitchen window, under the bed, even leaping onto the dining table to stalk a mandarin orange. But whenever Clara scolded him gently, Ash would jump down obediently, and Benny would quietly step between them as if to mediate. One morning, Clara saw Ash carrying a toy out into the yard, a toy she didn't remember buying. Curious, she followed him and saw Benny standing under a tree, tail gently wagging. Ash brought the toy over and placed it before Benny, as if gifting it. Clara knelt down, It was an old plastic mouse, once belonging to the neighbor's cat that Clara had looked after years ago. Ash had dug it out from the storage shed, and now he was sharing it. He, a wild bobcat, was learning how to give. Not by instinct, but by watching Benny. Winter came. Snow blanketed the roof, froze the small stream behind the house. Clara lit the fireplace each afternoon, placed soft mats around the floor so Benny and Ash wouldn't get cold feet. Each evening, as she read her books, the two creatures lay close together, sometimes by the fire, sometimes on the sofa, but always touching at least one point: ear, paw, or tail. Benny had begun sleeping more deeply, no longer curling up in fear, no longer flinching at every sound. His breathing was steady, eyes closed, and occasionally he let out gentle snores, the kind of peaceful sound Clara once thought she'd never hear from him. Ash had changed too. He grew fast, bigger, stronger, his golden eyes sharp as blades and his leap quick as lightning. But with Benny, he was always gentle. He never jumped on him, never used his claws when playing. He would stalk, pretend to pounce, then pull back, as if he knew. Benny was someone who had once been broken. One stormy day, thunder cracked overhead, and Clara thought Benny would panic like he used to. But he didn't. He simply glanced toward the shelf where the stuffed rabbit sat, then turned to Ash, curled beside him, one paw resting on his chest, and he sighed. Not out of weariness, but out of peace. He no longer needed to hold on to the rabbit, because now he was holding something real, a life, a friend, a reason not to give up. Clara watched that moment, tea still in hand, but her lips trembled. She understood what was happening. It wasn't that Benny was healing. He had transformed from one who once searched for safety into a place of safety for another. From a creature who once clung to a toy to survive, into a warm refuge for someone to lean on. One night, Clara had a dream. She saw herself standing in the burned forest, cold wind sweeping through the ashes. She was searching for something. Then, amidst the wreckage, she saw Benny, not holding the rabbit, not looking sorrowful, but walking toward her, Ash behind him, both of them glowing like fire, but not burning. They didn't speak, but their eyes were filled with meaning. Then Clara woke up. In the middle of a winter night, with firelight flickering from the hearth, she looked over to the sofa where two small souls were sleeping, and she thought, it wasn't me who saved them. It was they, by existing together, who saved me. Winter passed like a snow-white dream. The forest surrounding Clara's house lay blanketed in stillness, as if the world had paused to listen to the breathing of three small souls. But inside that wooden house, life didn't sleep. It bloomed in every warmth, in the crackling sound of burning wood in the fireplace, in Benny's brown eyes and Ash's bright golden gaze, two fractured spirits now stitching themselves back together with something unbelievably simple: presence. Benny had begun to truly age. The fur around his muzzle grew noticeably whiter, his steps slower, his breath sometimes sounding like wind slipping through the walls. Yet strangely, he had never looked more solid. Not because of strength, but because he no longer feared. He no longer needed to be protected, because he had become the protector. Clara often watched in silence, never interfering. She saw Benny still patrol each morning like a sacred ritual. Not just instinct anymore, but a promise to himself. He checked windows, walked the yard, paused at every familiar corner, and instead of returning to his rabbit as before, he returned to Ash. Ash, now nearly grown, his body longer, muscles more defined, tail twitching with excitement. He no longer hid, no longer tiptoed. He moved with the confidence of a creature who knew exactly where he belonged. And that place was this house, beside Benny, beneath Clara's hand. One day, the sun came out after weeks of gray, Clara left the back door open. Cool wind swept in, carrying the scent of pine, decaying leaves, and rich earth. Ash sat on the doorstep, gazing out at the snow-covered yard, ears perked, body taut. Clara saw that look, not the look of a house cat. It was the look of the wild, of something born to be free. She walked over, sat beside him. "You want to go?" she asked, not expecting an answer. Ash didn't turn his head, but Clara saw his tail gently tap the doorway. Benny came over and sat with them both. He looked at Ash, then at Clara. No one spoke. And then Ash jumped down from the step. He didn't run, just walked, light as breath, quiet as a soul returning home. Clara stood, her heart tightening, but she didn't call out. She didn't hold him back. Only Benny stayed seated. He watched Ash for a while, then didn't follow. He turned back. Lay down. Let out a long, steady breath. Ash was gone for nearly 3 hours. Clara sat by the fire, unable to do anything. She wanted to believe he'd return, but her chest felt as if someone was gripping it. She knew true love isn't about holding on. It's about the courage to let go, but saying that was easier. The sun began to set. Snow in the yard hardened into ice. Clara stepped onto the porch and called softly, "Ash." No sound, only the wings of birds. She turned back inside. But as she closed the door, she heard a faint scratching. Ash was standing there. In his mouth was a small dead mouse. Clara froze. He placed it carefully on the step, then looked up at Benny. Benny stood, walked over, sniffed. He didn't eat it, didn't bite, just wagged his tail gently. Clara burst into tears. Ash hadn't gone away to leave. He had gone to hunt, to contribute, to truly become part of this family, not just the one who was rescued, but the one who knew how to give. Who taught him that? Clara didn't need to ask. It was Benny, the one who once placed toy after toy before a wild creature, saying, "I trust you." And now Ash was placing his first gift before Benny in return. So do I. March arrived, bringing with it spring breezes and the scent of wildflowers blooming around the house. Clara began tending the garden again, planting daisies, watercress, and rows of mint. Benny followed her into the garden every day. Ash leapt back and forth across the fence, chasing butterflies, stalking squirrels. They had a new game. Ash would climb a tree and drop toys down, a ball, a fabric mouse, a small piece of wood. Benny stood below, head raised to catch them. He didn't always make it in time, but whenever he did, he wagged his tail, set the toy down, and waited for the next one. The game went on for hours. Clara watched with tearful laughter. An old dog and a bobcat, two beings who were never meant to be together, now played like they had been born for each other. That night, Clara wrote in her journal, "Benny no longer clutches the rabbit every day, but sometimes he still looks up at the shelf, where the rabbit now rests, honored like a relic of the past. On stormy nights or when thunder rolls, he doesn't panic anymore. He just glances at the rabbit, then turns to Ash. And I know he doesn't need anything to feel safe anymore. He has Ash, and Ash has him." One day, a guest came by, the local veterinarian. She looked at Ash and frowned. "Are you sure?" "That's a bobcat. Keeping one indoors for too long isn't good." Clara just smiled and said nothing. She led the vet into the living room. Benny lay on the rug, eyes half closed. Ash was beside him, head resting on Benny's back, both breathing in rhythm like waves on a quiet shore. No growls, no wild stares, no swipes, only peace. The vet stood in silence for a long moment, then whispered, "I've never seen anything like this." Clara smiled. Me neither. And on soft-lit afternoons, when the golden hour cast its glow across the floorboards, Clara often sat on the porch, teacup in hand, watching her two creatures chase each other through the yard, neither leading, neither following, just running, living, being. They weren't a miracle. They were what was right. An old dog once broken, a wild bobcat once abandoned, a woman who once believed her life was over, and all of them reborn through quiet trust and unconditional kindness. That winter, the wind sweeping down the slopes of Cedar Ridge no longer felt like razor blades, but like a mother's sleeve brushing gently across a child's neck. Cold, but never lonely. On the creaky wooden porch of a small house at the end of the valley sat an aging figure with a bobcat named Ash curled on her lap. Grown now, strong, but still snuggling like a kitten when touched by the heart it trusted most. Clara sat there, teacup in hand, eyes half closed, her heart listening for something without sound. Juniper, her little granddaughter, giggled in the garden, playing hide-and-seek with Ash, the wild friend who never left her side since the day she returned from the brink of death. But that day, something was different. Clara felt it, not in words, but in silence. Ash didn't leap and chase like usual. He walked slowly, placing each paw onto the snow like unanswered questions. He reached the forest's edge and turned to look back, his eyes not of an animal, but of a soul saying goodbye. Clara knew. Her heart tightened. Not from the fear of losing him, but from understanding. It was time. The next day, Clara wrapped a scarf around her neck, put on a thick coat, and followed the tracks Ash had left. Juniper didn't come. She stayed home with the vet, who had come to examine Ash after he hadn't eaten for 3 days. But Clara knew this wasn't a sickness of the body. She walked deep into the forest, slowly, as though entering a sacred rite, and when she reached the place, she stopped. Ash was lying on a stone slab, half covered in snow. He was still breathing, but his eyes were gazing beyond mountains, beyond sky, beyond time, as if he was waiting for something or someone. Clara stepped closer, knelt beside him, said nothing, only placed her hand on his head. "You've completed your mission," she whispered. "I know." Ash didn't close his eyes, but he didn't look at her anymore either. He was already on his way, not toward death, but toward freedom. Clara didn't cry, not because she wasn't grieving, but because she understood love doesn't end in loss. It simply changes form. That afternoon, Juniper wrote a letter. With the wobbly handwriting of an 8-year-old, she wrote, "Ash didn't disappear. He just became the wind. So whenever I run, he'll run with me. Whenever I'm sad, he'll nuzzle into my heart. And whenever I miss him, I just have to close my eyes." Clara finished reading, folded the letter, and placed it on the small altar next to a photo of Ash stretched across the sofa, goofy eyes watching Juniper eat ice cream. She smiled, a smile both aching and beautiful. 3 months later, spring arrived earlier than usual. Plum blossoms bloomed white across the hillside. Birds chirped as if rewriting a symphony once left unfinished. And then, one morning, while Clara was hanging laundry, she heard a cry from the backyard. "Grandma, Grandma, there's something in the tree hollow." Clara ran out, heart uneasy, and she saw 3 tiny beings, eyes still closed, trembling and curled up inside a hollow tree. Bobcat kittens, no mother, no signs of struggle, no blood, only 3 lives in need of love. Juniper sank to her knees, hands over her chest, tears falling as if someone were whispering in her ear, "This time, it's your turn." Clara stood still for a moment, then nodded. She didn't ask who had sent them. She didn't need a logical explanation from the world. She knew Ash had returned, not in body, but in continuation. Clara adopted all three. Once again, the little house was filled with the sound of footsteps, scuffling on the sofa, the clatter of milk bowls being knocked over. Juniper named them Echo, River, and Dusk. And then, on a moonlit night, as Clara was writing in her journal, she heard a soft noise outside on the porch. She stepped out and saw something many would call a hallucination, a shadow. Large, majestic, sitting calmly atop the wooden fence, staring directly at her. No movement, no fear. Clara wasn't afraid. She simply smiled. "Thank you, Ash." The shadow vanished into the woods like the wind, and then, one day, a documentary filmmaker came. He had heard the strange tale of a bobcat that lived indoors like a pet, of an old woman over 70 who still ventured into the forest each day, searching for traces of something unnameable, and of 3 wild kittens mysteriously found after the first bobcat had passed away. "Do you believe in destiny?" he asked. Clara simply smiled, eyes distant. "Number, I don't believe in destiny," she said. "I believe in response. When we love long enough, the world responds in its own way."
Years later, Juniper grew up and became a wildlife protector. She built a rescue center right in Cedar Ridge Valley, the very place where she and Ash had once played as children. On the main wall of the center, there is a massive mural. It's Ash, eyes deep, marked like patterns of time, gazing forward, as if he knows that everything he once protected, once loved, is still alive. In Juniper, in Clara, in Echo, River, and Dusk. And in the stories the world continues to tell about a bobcat, not just rescued, but one who rescued the heart of an entire family. And now, you know the rest of the story. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever lost a beloved friend or found hope in something no one else believed in, leave us a comment below. We read every message, and your words might be the light someone else needs. Don't forget to hit like if you want more people to hear about Ash and Benny. And if you believe in love that transcends species, differences, and the wild, subscribe so you won't miss the stories to come. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We preserve what's beautiful before the world forgets how to listen.
5 lions surrounded a little girl in the wild. Then a German shepherd appeared. What happened next? Lily's small feet stumbled over twisted roots and jagged rocks as she pushed her way through the dense underbrush. Her cheeks were streaked with dirt, her knees scraped raw and bleeding. Only 7 years old, she had been walking for what felt like forever. The crash had come out of nowhere. One minute, her family's Land Rover was bouncing along the rough trail after a long day of volunteer work in a remote village, and the next, the vehicle was upside down at the foot of a dry ravine. Her mother and father had been conscious, but barely. Her father whispered for her to find water, to hurry. So she had run. Into the wild, into the unknown. Now, as the last rays of sunlight slipped behind the tree line, the shadows around her grew thicker, colder, more alive. Fear clawed at her throat. Every sound made her flinch. Her tiny hands trembled as she clutched the torn strap of her backpack. There was no water, no help, no path to follow. She was lost. She fell beside a massive baobab tree, curling her body into a ball, tears streaking her dusty face. "Please," she whispered. "Please, someone help me." The air shifted. Leaves rustled behind her. Then she heard it. a low rumbling growl, deep and primal. Her breath caught. She looked up. 5 enormous lions emerged from the shadows like ghosts given flesh. Their golden eyes locked on her. Their bodies rippled with muscle and menace. They moved slowly, almost curiously, in a half-circle, surrounding her, trapping her. Lily froze. One lion licked its chops. Another bared its teeth. The largest among them, with a dark mane and a scar across his snout, stepped forward, head low, tail twitching. Their growls rose in harmony, a terrible sound that made the earth itself seem to tremble. Lily could not even scream. She shut her eyes and waited for the pain. Then, out of the silence, came another sound, a bark, sharp, commanding, followed by the unmistakable thud of paws against dirt. A large German shepherd burst through the undergrowth like a thunderbolt. Its fur was matted, its eyes sharp and blazing. It positioned itself directly between Lily and the lions, legs braced wide, head held high. It barked again, louder, deeper, a sound not of fear but authority. The lions halted. Instantly, their snarling ceased, their bodies went still. For a long moment, nothing moved, not a branch, not a breath. The German shepherd did not growl again. It only stared, fierce and unflinching, into the eyes of the alpha lion. The big cat tilted its head, almost reverently. Then it backed away a step. So did the others. Lily, shaking, opened her eyes. She saw the lions standing still, watching, not attacking, not advancing. Then her gaze moved to the dog. It was not a stray. It was not a pet. It was something else, something impossible, something that should not have been there, and yet it was. And the lions obeyed it. Years before the day Lily found herself surrounded by lions, the same forest had been the stage of a much quieter tragedy, one that went unnoticed by the world, hidden beneath the rustling leaves and ancient branches. Deep within the wilderness, a pride of lions lived peacefully. The male was strong and watchful, the female fierce and nurturing. Together they guarded their territory, raising their cubs in the balance of predator and prey, where only the wisest and bravest survived. But one night, that balance was shattered. The distant echo of gunfire tore through the night air. Poachers, armed with rifles and greed, had come under the cover of darkness. The father lion fought to protect his family, roaring defiance into the night. He died first. The mother stayed behind, shielding her young, snarling and lunging even as bullets ripped through her chest. She died second. By morning, 5 lion cubs were left behind. No older than a few weeks, their eyes barely open, they huddled together, mewling with confusion and hunger. They waited for warmth that would never return. They cried out for milk, for protection, for the familiar breath of their mother. But the forest did not answer. Except it did. Somewhere not far away, a lone creature moved through the shadows. A German shepherd. Once domesticated, once loved, she had been abandoned by hunters when she grew too old, too slow. She wandered the forest now, half wild, driven by instinct and memory. Her own litter of pups had died months before, in a den flooded by storm. Since then her heart had wandered empty, her teats still full with milk, her body restless with grief. She heard the cries, the soft, helpless cries of something in pain. She followed the sound. When she found them, 5 lion cubs lying beside the bloodied body of their mother. She did not turn away. She did not flee. She stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, tail low, ears raised. One of the cubs hissed weakly. Another tried to crawl away, but she lay down beside them. She licked their fur. She nuzzled them close, and then, astonishingly, she let them nurse. From that moment, something ancient and unspoken passed between them. Days turned into weeks. She hunted what she could, small birds, rodents, even fruit, bringing back scraps of nourishment. She slept curled around them at night, her body a wall against predators. She growled at hyenas, she barked at leopards, she chased off jackals. As they grew stronger, she taught them the laws of the forest, not as a lioness would, but as only she could. She led them to water. She taught them patience, silence, discipline. And they followed. They learned. They thrived. The 5 lion cubs became elder men, massive, powerful, each with their own spirit and strength. But to them she was never anything less than their mother. They did not see a dog. They saw the one who had fed them, protected them, taught them. In the wild there are no textbooks, no rules written in stone. Only survival, and sometimes, against every law of nature, love. Love that transcends species. Love born not of blood, but of choice. In the deepest part of the forest, beneath the trees where no one had ever walked, a family had formed. 1 mother, 5 sons, and no one to witness the miracle. The air was heavy with tension as the German shepherd held her ground between Lily and the 5 lions. Her chest heaved with every breath, but her stance never faltered. Behind her, Lily trembled, her tiny fingers gripping fistfuls of fur as if holding onto a lifeline. The lions, massive, golden, powerful, stood still, their eyes fixed not on the child, but on the dog. Something unseen passed between them. Not fear, not confusion. Something deeper. Recognition. Deference. And then, Lily whispered, her voice cracking, "Maya." The dog's ears perked. Lily turned, eyes wide with wonder. "Maya," she repeated, falling to her knees. She cupped the dog's face in her hands, tears spilling freely now. "It's you. It's really you." Years ago, in a small rural village not far from this forest, Lily's family had found a starving German shepherd puppy, limping along the side of a dirt road. Her ribs showed through her skin, her legs were weak, but her eyes were strong. Lily had begged to keep her. They named her Maya. For 3 beautiful months, she had been part of the family. Then one day, during a powerful thunderstorm, Maya vanished. The gate had been broken. They searched for days, weeks, but Maya was gone. The loss had haunted Lily ever since, and now, here she was, larger, fiercer, wilder, but the same soul behind those amber eyes. Maya leaned in and licked the tears from Lily's cheeks. One by one, the lions stepped forward. Muscles rippled under their coats. Their manes stirred in the breeze. They growled, not with hostility, but uncertainty. Maya turned her head, locking eyes with the alpha lion. She gave a low, deliberate growl, not a warning but a command. She moved slightly to the side, revealing Lily, then stepped forward and barked once, sharp and clear. The lion stopped. Then, in a gesture as unexpected as it was humbling, the alpha lion lowered his head. So did the others. To Lily, they did not growl. They did not approach. They simply watched, as if in awe or reverence. The girl was no longer prey. She was something else entirely, something sacred, because she belonged to the one they called Mother. The forest darkened as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air cooled, crickets chirped in the distance. The sense of peace was fragile, fleeting. Then came the snapping of twigs, the low whooping calls that every creature in the African wilderness knew to fear. Hyenas. A pack of them, drawn by the scent of blood, sweat, and vulnerability. 10 pairs of glowing eyes blinked from the shadows. They crept low to the ground, their steps silent, their laughter rising. They had smelled the girl. They had sensed the lions, and they were hungry enough to challenge both. Maya growled low in her throat. The lions turned instantly. The alpha lion roared, deep and thunderous. Maya barked in unison. Without a single word or signal, the 5 lions moved in unison, forming a semicircle around Lily. Maya stood at the center, directing them with short barks and nudges. It was like watching an army move under the direction of a general. Every lion took a position, protecting every flank. The hyenas charged. It was chaos. Teeth clashed, claws slashed, the night filled with snarls and screeches. But the lions, older now, stronger than they had ever been, fought with a purpose they had never known before. Not for territory, not for dominance, but for her. For the girl their mother had chosen to protect. Maya darted into the fray when needed, biting and barking, drawing attention away from the weakest points. One lion took a blow to the shoulder but held firm. Another pinned two hyenas at once, jaws snapping inches from Maya's tail. The pack realized too late that they had underestimated this strange alliance. After what felt like hours but was likely minutes, the hyenas retreated, wounded and howling. Silence returned. Maya limped back to Lily and lay down beside her. The lions followed, surrounding the child in a ring of fur and warmth. Lily crawled to Maya's side, rested her head against the dog's neck, and finally, slept. And in that place where death and wildness ruled, a miracle unfolded. A child, a dog, and 5 lions, different in every way, bound by something greater than blood, slept beneath the stars, unafraid. The first light of dawn spilled gently across the treetops, casting golden rays through the leaves as birds began their morning calls. In the soft hush of the forest, Maya stood, ears alert, gaze focused eastward. Around her, the 5 lions stirred from their slumber, stretching silently, their eyes scanning the shadows one last time before lowering their heads respectfully toward the small girl still nestled between them. Lily rubbed her eyes and sat up, disoriented but safe. Maya moved to her side, nuzzling her softly before stepping back and looking toward the thickets ahead. Without hesitation, the dog turned and began walking, her steps slow and deliberate. Lily rose to her feet and followed. Behind them, the 5 lions rose as one and fell into formation, moving like silent shadows through the brush, protective and composed. For hours they walked, 10 kilometers of wild terrain, sun climbing higher with each step. Maya paused often to sniff the air, checking for danger. Lily's small legs burned with exhaustion, but she pressed on, comforted by the steady rhythm of paw steps surrounding her. Finally, as they crested a ridge, a glimmer of silver caught her eye. An old radio tower standing near a ranger outpost, nestled beside a small clearing. Maya barked once. A ranger emerged from the cabin, rubbing his eyes and lifting his binoculars. He froze. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, nearly dropping the lenses. Within minutes, 4 more rangers rushed outside. They stared in stunned disbelief as a barefoot little girl in tattered clothes emerged from the forest, flanked by 5 full-grown lions and led by a German shepherd that walked with the confidence of a general. Guns were raised, then slowly lowered. No one dared move. The rangers watched in silent awe as Maya approached them. She stopped a few feet away, sat down, and looked back at Lily, who hesitated, then stepped forward. "I'm Lily Porter," she said, her voice dry and hoarse. "I think I was lost, but I'm okay now." The rangers rushed to her, wrapping her in blankets, offering water, asking dozens of questions at once. Lily could barely speak, but she told them everything, from the crash, to the forest, to Maya and the lions. At first no one believed her, until they checked her name, until they checked the archives, and found a photograph taken 3 years prior of a younger Lily cradling a starving puppy in her lap, a little German shepherd with one floppy ear and bright eyes. Her name had been Maya. She had vanished during a storm while the family was volunteering in the region, and now she had returned, not as a pet, but as something else entirely. News of the miracle spread quickly. Reporters, biologists, conservationists all flocked to the region. Documentarians set up cameras. Animal behaviorists shook their heads in disbelief. 5 adult lions and a domesticated dog forming a familial bond? Defying every known instinct and rule of survival. The world fell in love with the story. And yet, as with every miracle there came questions, concerns, debates. One conservation official proposed that the lions be separated. They were predators after all, dangerous, too unpredictable, too close to humans. But footage captured by the rangers told another story, of lions protecting, not attacking, of a dog commanding them with more grace and authority than any whip or chain. Public opinion turned swiftly. Millions signed petitions. Messages of love and wonder poured in from every corner of the globe. Children drew pictures. Elders wept. Scientists re-examined everything they thought they knew. And in the end, the decision was made. Maya and her lions would not be separated. They were relocated, together, to a protected open reserve hundreds of miles away, where hunting was forbidden and fences were few. There they could live freely, as they had before, but safe from poachers, safe from separation. A sanctuary built not just to preserve them, but to honor what they represented. As the gates closed behind them, Maya looked back once. Lily, standing with her parents at a distance, raised a hand. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from something deeper, something like awe. This was not just a reunion. This was the return of love freely given, come back in the most extraordinary form. It was a debt repaid, not in coin or words, but in protection, in survival, in loyalty. It was a miracle. Years passed. Lily Porter grew from a frightened little girl into a woman with purpose burning in her heart. The memory of that night in the forest, the growls, the glowing eyes, the warmth of fur surrounding her as she slept, never left her, nor did the image of Maya, standing between her and death, unshaken, unstoppable. That bond had shaped her, carved a path that she would follow for the rest of her life. She studied biology, conservation. She volunteered in sanctuaries across Africa and Asia, driven not just by knowledge, but by gratitude. She did not just want to understand animals. She wanted to protect them, to give back what had once been given to her. Every year, without fail, she returned to that open reserve, the sanctuary where Maya and her lions had found safety. As she walked through the tall grass, now grown higher than her shoulders, her eyes searched for familiar silhouettes. The arc of a mane in the sunlight, the flick of a tail, the glint of amber eyes watching her from a shaded grove. And then she would see her. Maya, older now, her muzzle streaked with gray, her pace slower, but her spirit as commanding as ever. Her presence still rippled through the pride like the whisper of wind through trees. Lions stepped aside when she walked past. Even the youngest cubs stopped to look up at her with reverence. To them, she was not just a dog. She was their matriarch, their compass, their law. Lily would kneel in the grass, arms open, and Maya, always, would come. Their reunion needed no words, only quiet, steady breathing, the touch of a head pressed against a shoulder, the silent language of two souls forever bonded by something rare and unspoken. On her last visit, as the sun dipped low behind the acacia trees, Lily watched from a distance as Maya lay in the tall grass, surrounded by her family. One of the lions, now a mighty male with a mane streaked in gold and age, lowered his head gently beside her, nuzzling her neck. She responded by licking his brow, slowly, like she had done when he was just a cub lost in the world. The others gathered near, silent, still. A family unlike any other. She was not their kind, Lily whispered, watching the scene with tears in her eyes, but she was always their mother. And so, in the heart of the wild, a story was written, not with words, but with loyalty, love, and a bond that defied every rule of nature. A dog who became a mother to lions, a child saved by the very family she once helped to create, and a world reminded that sometimes the most powerful force on earth is not strength, but compassion. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in the magic of unlikely friendships, and the healing power of love across species, then we invite you to join our journey. Subscribe to Amazing Paws Stories for more true emotional tales like this. Stories that celebrate courage, kindness, and the extraordinary bonds between animals and humans. Because here, we do not just tell stories, we tell the ones that stay with you forever.